Rock Your Best Life podcast. With me today, I have Michelle Hurn. She is a dietitian, an ultra marathon runner, and a new author. Welcome, Michelle. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah. So for those of you that, for people that may not know about you, can you tell us a little about your health journey, your story?
Yeah, I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version, but basically, my story really starts when I was much younger. When I was a child, when I was 12, I had anorexia, really severely sick. I was almost 5 feet tall and 57.5 pounds. So I was hospitalized for 2 months. You know, the doctors actually gave me about a 10% chance of survival and even less of a chance to fully recover. In that time, I was having heart failure, kidney failure. I mean, just my entire body was shutting down. And, you know, I ended up, recovering, physically. I was able to gain weight, ended up, being able to go back to school. I became, an athlete. I got into cross country running, and I wanted to be a dietitian. I thought that becoming a dietitian would be a way to help other people with nutrition. And unfortunately, when I got into the field of nutrition, when I got into the dietetic program, I would just start asking questions like, hey, I don't really understand. Why are we giving diabetics so many carbohydrates? I thought they couldn't tolerate carbohydrates because it's, the standard of practice in most hospitals to give a diabetic 75 to 90 grams of carbohydrates at a meal and then follow it with insulin. So as a student, I suggested, wouldn't it make more sense to just not give them the carbohydrates? And I was immediately kind of pegged as this difficult dietetic student, hey, this is guidelines, stop, asking questions. And I remember my first time in the ICU as a student, we were looking at tube feeding formulas, and I looked at, the back of the ingredients, and I was like, oh my God, these haven't changed in 25 years. When I was, very sick and inpatient treatment and had to be tube fed 24 hours a day, the main ingredients for tube feeding formulas are corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil, and it's still that way. It's still the same. And to be fair, there are better tube feeding formulas now, but none, to my knowledge, are covered by insurance. So unless you're able to spend, about $800 to $1,500 a day out of pocket, you're going to end up getting tube fed, the kind of the standard, the corn syrup and soy. And so, but, you're new to the field. And so I just kind of went with it, tried to learn, maybe I'm missing something. And I was also just taught that, carbohydrates are the foundation of human nutrition. Therefore you need them for every disease state. And at that time, I was also an endurance athlete. I've run 12 marathons and, qualified for Boston 12 times. And I ate a very high carbohydrate, what I considered a healthy diet. It was very low in fat, ate a lot of chicken, a lot of brown rice, a lot of potatoes, lots and lots of vegetables. As a dietitian, I was taught you can never have too many vegetables. And, I did pretty well as an athlete, but I also struggled with depression, severe depression and anxiety. And I was just told after I had my eating disorder, when I was in eating disorder recovery, look, this is your lot in life. Some people have diabetes, some people have anxiety. You're always going to have anxiety. You're always going to have racing thoughts around food. It may always be a huge part of your life, but you'll just have to control the behaviors. So that's what I was taught recovery was. It was, you're always going to struggle. You're always going to be anxious. You're going to have to teach yourself how not to act on those behaviors. So I just kind of assumed okay, this is how I'm going to have to function. And it was tough. I mean, there were periods of my life where my anxiety became so severe, I would miss school or work. I engaged in some pretty unhealthy coping mechanisms related to, self-injury. In 2017, I actually started to suffer with suicidal ideation. Things got really bad. But once again, I just came back to, oh, well, this is just who I am. This is how I'm wired. And it wasn't really until 2019 that I actually just lost my health, that I made a really large nutrition change. And that's kind of what spurred this most recent health journey in the book.
Wow. That is such an amazing story, Michelle. I can relate to a lot of that anxiety, depression. I think a lot of us are told especially if you have other family members, we're just depressed. We're just anxious. Can you give us a little background on your education and your experience in the dietitian world?
Sure.
I guess until I read your book, I didn't really realize how just different it was,
Yeah. So, to be a dietitian, you have to get your 4-year undergrad degree. So you certainly are taught like the basics of chemistry, biochemistry, organic chemistry. But when it comes to actually, when you get into the dietetic internship, like the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by a lot of processed food companies. Everything from, the number one sponsors are PepsiCo, Frito-Lay, General Mills, Splenda. At the biggest nutrition conference in 2019, GlaxoSmithKline, which is a maker of diabetic drugs. I'm shocked that that's not, more people don't throw a fit about that. Like, oh my God, like this is a huge conflict of interest. Mm-hmm. And even as a young dietitian, when I first became a dietitian, McDonald's was a sponsor, Coca-Cola was a sponsor, Soy Joy. I brought this up, like this can't be good. But I was also just told like, hey, what are you going to do? Like, it's all about money, and that was kind of a theme through my dietetic career, is this most dietitians I talked to realized there was something wrong. Like this isn't good. This is a conflict of interest. But also we're like, well, what are we supposed to do about it? Because here we are, we spent all this money on this, our education and career. Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you go against the guidelines, it's not like, once you go into practice, you have to follow a set of guidelines. Like I wasn't allowed to teach low carb education or, any type of ketogenic diet education, even though we have clinical trials on it. Mm-hmm. The standard of practice in most hospitals is the current standard nutrition guidelines. So you follow those or, you don't practice.
Wow. That must be really hard. Yeah. And, in your book, you touch on like, diabetes and sarcopenia and, heart disease and all that. And, it's really interesting, the advice that people are given, because I know my dad, he has diabetes and heart disease. And he doesn't really follow the doctor's advice all the time. But a lot of the advice that he is given, he's just given like more insulin, and it kind of contradicts like what I've learned in the last 2 years. And then when I try and tell him what I've learned, he's an older generation. So it goes in one ear and out the other. And so
it's very challenging.
Yeah. Like, what can we do, if we have like a loved one, who's
that's I get asked that question quite a bit, and you made a really good point. I've been really fortunate to talk to like Dr. Ben Bickman, Dr. Eric Westman, Dr. Ken Berry, and the education that doctors get. And I'm the youngest of 4. My 2 oldest sisters are both MDs. The next oldest sister is a veterinarian, so they've gone through medical school. They are not taught how to fix things with nutrition. And unfortunately, if they do get any nutrition education, it's going to be the nutrition guidelines. So what they're really taught is just how do we fix things with medication? And, I've said before on other podcasts too, that I truly believe that every human that goes into the medical field, like genuinely wants to help. Like, it's not like people are going in like, oh, I just want to throw medication at you and have you have a terrible existence. Like, we want to do the right thing, right? Like that's generally what, I would imagine most people go into medicine or any type of health or nutrition field thinking we're going to help people. Mm-hmm. But what happens is, what I believe is a really, like, medicine is a really powerful thing for acute illnesses. What I mean by that, if you're in like a car accident, or you have like, a bad fall or something, like, our system is great. Like, you want stitches, surgery, like, boom, we got you. Like, happen now, we can fix this. But for those long-term chronic illnesses, it's a nightmare. What we're trying to do is we're trying to, we're ignoring the root cause, and we're patching it up with medications that cause just a cascade of other problems. Mm-hmm. And so what do we do is your question. How can we reach this generation? I don't believe we're going to do it on from the top down. And what I mean by that is, I don't think we're going to see big major changes in healthcare anytime soon. We just, got the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines released. I had the pleasure of talking to Doug Reynolds, one of the president of Low Carb USA, mm-hmm. and him and Nina Teschel and a lot of those experts went and just advocated with their clinical trials, like, hey, let's talk about this. And he said the people that were listening were just doodling, like they have no interest in changing the guidelines. And it's not because we're wrong. We have the data and we know it works. It's because if we shift the guidelines, we're going to lose money. I think that's the best way we have to explain it to people. We have to really say, like, look, I know we all want to think that everybody's out for our best interests, but you know, we live in a capitalist society, and if I heal you as a patient, I lose you as a customer. I can't kill you either. I can't kill you and I can't heal you. I have to keep you perpetually sick. Yeah. You know, so it's really sad and it's really unfortunate. I think I think the best thing we can do, one, you know, unfortunately, you know, you and I, we just want to shake people like, oh, this will help, this will work, you'll feel so much better. But that often leads people to just want to do the opposite more. And we also, unfortunately, in medicine, we don't really address what carbohydrates and sugar do for most people, which is a comfort. It's a coping mechanism. It feels good. It tastes good. It's, you know, so we don't really address that issue. So I think, you know, I've learned what I do when someone that I care about is potentially struggling is I always ask too, like, hey, can I share with you like what's going on with me? I make it more about me, like bring it back to you. Cause you know, what you want to do is be like, hey, you know, you should really stop eating that much sugar, or you really need to cut carbs, you know, and that just immediately puts people on the defensive. So say, hey, you know what, can I share with you what's really changed my life? Or people will even ask. That's another really cool thing about leading by example. People like, man, Michelle, weren't you like struggling running a year ago? And I'm like, yeah, now I'm running ultra marathons now. Like, wow, are you still in healthcare? Like, no, man, but I wrote a book. Like, really? So like kind of getting people excited about your own story, because often, you know, there's a saying that sometimes it takes people like being exposed to something like 10 times before they're going to make a change. And I would love to say the first time I heard about a low carb diet, I was like, I'm all in, but I wasn't, you know, I really had to kind of hit rock bottom with my own health before I was like, all right, I have to do something different. Yeah. And we also have to, I think if people bring up concerns, I think it's really good for everybody just to be equipped with a few simple like responses. Because I hear often like, oh, that's really bad for your heart. That's really bad. You know, it's going to raise LDL. So I think maybe being ready for like, you know, what is it? Mostly it's like LDL or cancer, just things like that. You know, actually that's been proven not to be true. Can I share some information about that? And always asking, because people have the right to say no. But I think most people, at some degree, most people know that something's wrong. You know, they know their health isn't great, but there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. You know, if somebody admits that they're wrong, then that they also have to admit that they're kind of, you know, struggling or failing. And that's hard for people to do. So I think just showing up, being kind, being ready with some information. But yeah, family's hard. I won't even do nutrition consults or anything for my own family, because coming from somebody else, you know, it holds more weight. So.
Yeah, I've learned to kind of do the same thing with my family. Is I just kind of, you know, I tell them what I was. A lot of them don't even know what I was struggling with my digestion and how bad it's been for years, which caused me to kind of I changed my whole, you know, diet, but when I tell them what works for me, and they kind of listen, but then they're really just, you know, not ready, it seems, to kind of make a big change.
Sure.
You know.
Hey, you know, and that's okay. I think that's one of the hardest things. Like I always tell myself, and I think about this, I have a few friends that are, you know, mental health providers, like therapists and counselors. And it's like, you know, we're not responsible for anybody else's recovery or journey. Yeah. You know, can you imagine if like this therapist, their success or their life value was like, does this person change? They would be constantly depressed. But, you know, it's my responsibility, I feel like, as just a good human, to show up, share my story, to offer hope and encouragement, and offer truth. Yeah. And then, you just kind of have to let people do their thing. And then, you know, just be ready when they're ready.
Yeah. And that's what I do with, you know, people I coach too, and just friends. Everyone's seen my journey around me. And it's funny, like they will come up to me and tell me, well, oh, you know what? I started eating even, you know, keto or low carb, or I started eating more meat. and they'll tell me how amazing they feel, or they lost weight. You know, but I think if we can try and get people to at least like think outside the box and think, you know, maybe I can take out some grains, or I can take out the bread or the processed food, you know.
Absolutely.
I find like that's kind of a first step for people is it's kind of hard to take the whole bandage off, I guess.
Yeah. And, and that's what's nice about coaching. And that's why I totally recommend, people, I wanted to have a whole chapter in my book. And, so many people throughout the book are coaches because I do think that can help, because some people, it kind of depends on your personality. Some people are like, I'm all in, let's go, let's do this. And some people are like, okay, I'm scared, like ease me into this. Right. So, and yeah, I do think, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing. It doesn't have to be this perfect, there's the whole analysis by, or paralysis by analysis. Like you get so overwhelmed with trying to get it perfect that you don't do anything. So it definitely like, and I've had people tell me the same thing. Like, man, I heard you speak and I haven't eaten red meat in years and I ate it and I felt so great. And to me, that's a huge victory. So it's like, sometimes we're going to just kind of start small and work our way in. But I would tell anybody, like, we want to start, there's what is it? An inch of action is better than a mile of intention. Sometimes we can take all this time thinking about it and planning it. And I would encourage anybody just, getting started, starting to make changes. And is much better than just sitting around pondering it.
Yes. Well, let's talk a little bit about your ultra marathon journey. Oh gosh, that was so inspirational in the book too. Cause I for a while I was into running, not marathons, but 5K or 10K. And I always found like running to be so freeing, kind of being outside. But I can imagine doing the 6-hour runs that you, oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah. I tell you what, and like I said, in 2019, that's when the end of 2019 is when I had decided I was never going to run again. I literally came home from work. I was working at the hospital. I was following a super high carbohydrate diet. My body had just been hurting. I wasn't recovering from my running workouts. And I remember I came home, it was 5:00 in the afternoon, in the early evening, I fell asleep, woke up at 2 a.m. My muscles were on fire. And so I drove to 7-Eleven. It's 2 a.m, got a bunch of ice, put it in the ice bath. And I'm just like, I can't do this. I can't run anymore. I was not a nice person to be around. I was struggling at work. I was hurting. And so, I kind of, I'd been running at that point since I was 14. And at that point I was 36. And I was just like, okay, I'm never going to run again. Let's make peace with this. And that's when I decided if I'm not going to run, why not do a ketogenic diet? Because I kind of intuitively knew carbs didn't make me feel good, but it just been so indoctrinated. I needed them. I was so scared. I literally, with all my education, and it was scared of giving up carbs or really going low. And that's when I, started to do my research and found out about the, carnivore diet. And I even saw Zach Bitter, this guy who's a 100-mile world record holder, was following a low carb diet. And my mind just literally exploded. I was like, this is impossible. And, I was researching him and I was just like, man, it's kind of started me down the rabbit hole of looking at clinical trials. And, I kind of became angry, whoa, nobody's taught me this. Nobody showed me a low carbohydrate diet is there's more studies on that way of eating for diabetics than any other way of eating. And it's, it works, it's sustainable. Anyway, so, but yeah, I literally, I didn't really run. I barely ran at all the first few weeks into my carnivore diet. And then I think around the 3rd or 4th week, I was hanging out with my wife, and she likes to read. She likes solitude. And she just kind of casually mentioned, you know what, you're bothering me. We go for a run. And I kind of freaked out. I was like, I haven't run in almost a month. And, it had been such a part of my identity that I was starting to make peace with giving it up. And then she was like, well, go for a run, and just casually mentioned it. It wasn't trying to make a big, profound statement. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'm just going to go jog. Maybe I can jog again. I like you said, it was such this peaceful healing. It was such a big part of my life, but I was scared because I was like, well, I'm following a low carb diet. Can I jog? And I had planned to go out and maybe run 15 or 20 minutes. And I just felt great. So I ran for an hour. And when I came back, me and my wife were both like, whoa, that's kind of cool. You felt great. This hasn't happened in a month. And so she got an idea hey, you know what? You can be a recreational runner and we'll go to the trails every other week. And I just started to run just really easily, and everything was great. I was kind of worried it was a fluke, but that was, I say the low carb, high fat animal-based diet really gave me the ability to dream. Like I'd finish my runs and I'd run by our mailbox and I'd throw my arms up in the air and be like, "Wah!" And I remember a neighbor came out and was like, "Are you okay?" They're like, "Oh yeah, sorry, Ryan, I'm good." It was just like the fun, the excitement, that joy that had just been missing, for the last years. I'd finish a run and I'd be sweating and in pain and angry. And it's like my body, all those carbohydrates, I now see, looking back, that my poor pancreas, over secreting insulin, I was getting dizzy and shaky and just not having enough protein to rebuild my body and my muscles. And so, so then I just, got this crazy idea, like, all right, well, instead of running a marathon, how about I run an ultra marathon?
Oh my gosh.
And, I connected with Zach and just like, I have to tell you, I mean, this is one of the beautiful things about running and about life was I wasn't as worried about the end goal as I was just about the process. Like I started to fall in love with running again. Like I loved it. I looked forward to it. It wasn't just like, oh my God, I'm going to hurt so bad. It was like, what can I do? And I also noticed during this time, like how I talk to myself kind of changed. Like it went from, oh, this sucks, or, oh, why am I doing this, to like, all right, come on, Michelle, you got this. You can do this. And I mean, the first time I ran 30 miles, I was on a training run. And when I was done, I like cried.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to do this. And I was supposed to run a 50-mile race in May 2020. And COVID destroyed that idea. So, but I can't tell you how great my coach Zach was. Like, all right, well, let's regroup. We'll so we scheduled something in early October and then that got canceled. And it's like, all right, let's keep going. Let's regroup. And then we scheduled a race in November, and it was right outside of Las Vegas. So I was like, well, if any place is probably going to happen, it's going to be outside of Las Vegas. And it was in this orchard. It was this 3-mile loop. And it was crazy because the day before it was like 86 degrees. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not heat adapted. I'm in the Pacific Northwest. But when the day of the race, it flipped. It was 68 degrees for the high, but there was 22-mile-an-hour winds.
Oh gosh.
Like, oh my God. So it was fun. Like one way you ran one loop and I was like, whoa, I'm fastest person ever. And then you'd like hit that wall. But I mean, probably the most amazing thing about that whole race was I never felt like during the entire 6 hours that I was going to run out of fuel. Like I having run marathons, like I've hit the wall and it's awful. It's just like dizzy, shaky, running through quicksand. And I just had to be okay with knowing that I was going to hurt, and like, okay, I can do this. Like, this is just pain. This is not death march. And it was an amazing feeling. I remember, my watch went off, I want to say around like 3:30 or something. I hit the marathon split and I was like, whoa, I've got 2.5 hours. Like, can I do this? Well, we're going to find out. Let's just keep going. And then around 5 hours, I was like, oh my God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to finish this. And it was a really powerful moment in my life. Like, I'll never forget, crossing the finish line, hearing because it's a timed race. It's not like you cross this end point. So hearing like that final horn go off, it was just like, oh my gosh, the most incredible wave of emotion. And it was interesting too, because I didn't even really feel sore and pain or anything for like another couple hours. The adrenaline was so high, a couple hours later, I was like, oh, this hurts. But it was pretty amazing. It definitely, I felt like, wow, like everything in my life changed. I went from,
oh, we lost you for a minute.
Sorry.
It's okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I went from just being, I went from being anxious and depressed, and we didn't even touch on that. My anxiety improved so much, like just my mind, and we talk about that a lot in the book, just like your mental health, and how when you eat in a way that aligns with human physiology, how it shifts neurotransmitters. Like, I mean, and I see this often in the keto and carnivore community, like, seeing major physical transformations, people who lose a lot of weight or maybe gain a lot of muscle, like, is really awesome, is really beautiful, and it inspires me. But I often think when I see those, I'm just like, man, like the person they become, like, I wish I could, if there was a way to like show that to people, like how is just anxious, depressed, and at times hopeless human, went from that to, I mean, now every day I look forward to, and I'm excited. And it doesn't mean, I wondered if I should say this more on my Instagram. It doesn't mean that my life is perfect or everything is great or everything is great. Like I still live in the world, right? I'm still a human, but it's just my general outlook on life. That has changed. And I mean, that's what we would probably hope for everybody, right? People we care
Yeah.
about is they're just generally happy. They have goals. They're pursuing their purpose and their passion. And yeah, so that was November 7th. And since then, I had a race that was supposed to happen in April that, you know, once again, got canceled. But next event is June 19th. So I have a 12-hour run.
Oh,
June
wow.
19th. So, yeah.
Wow, that's a big one.
Yes, that is something, once again, that I just saying it out loud sounds a little crazy, but I'll be excited to see how it goes.
Wow. I'm excited to see how it goes for you. Well, and how do you get ready for something like that? I mean, besides the training, like how do you prepare your body, I guess, in the forms of fuel? Like, do you eat really big before the night before, or, I mean, what do you do?
No, not really. You know, I used to, before a marathon, I would do kind of like you know, you would do like a super, super like 3 or 4 days of like really like low carb and then like crazy carbo load. And of course, you know, during that time of my life, I was also a super high carb athlete, but I really don't change anything. You know, I do slightly shift that week of right before my 6 hour, I bumped up the carbohydrates. You know, most days when my volume is pretty low, and it kind of depends, you know, I run anywhere between maybe a really low volume week is probably like 40 to 50. Most weeks is between like 60. I mean, it gets up to 80, 85 miles a week.
Wow.
But when I'm on those really low, easy weeks, probably about 50 to 75 grams of carbs. And so, yeah. And so like that last week, I was probably eating between 100 and 150 grams of carbs a day, which I don't like. It's kind of funny. My wife gives me a hard time, you know, because I just like, I don't want to do this. Like I have kind of a bad attitude about it. So I don't feel great, but I do think that's just making sure you're starting your long runs with, you know, topped off everything is probably a good idea. But yeah, you know, my diet is pretty simple. You know, I have a whole video on my YouTube because people have asked me, but you know, I'm not, if I was single, it would be even sillier because I just eat a lot of ground beef. Like I'm very simple, a lot of ground beef, a lot of butter. And then Corinne makes some long fermented sourdough bread that makes up most of my carbohydrates. And you know, occasionally I have a little bit of carrots and berries, but yeah, it's a much higher protein diet. Yeah. A lot of people in the ketogenic carnivore community eat a much higher fat diet. But I found for me as a really, you know, someone who's running quite a bit that probably utilizes gluconeogenesis from a lot of that protein, that's helpful. Yeah, but nothing changes other than bumping up the carbohydrates a little bit, and my volume is going down. So, you know, the same time where you're not running as much, you're eating a little bit more. Yeah.
That sounds good. And how long do you run at once? Like on a typical day, like, I guess how many miles?
It varies. Yeah, it varies. So we're in the last, you know, we're in the kind of the last big training block, and how we structure our training is we kind of reverse engineer, meaning like when I started back in, let's say, December, January after the last race, I usually take a little break. We're going to do the least race specific things initially. And then as we get closer to the race, we're going to do more race specific. So there's really no need, like right before an ultra marathon, to be doing 400 meter reps on a track, you know, that's training that very anaerobic system is not going to be helpful in running slow for 12 hours. So we do that earlier. We do some speed work. We're kind of toning up that system. And then as we're getting closer to the race, we're going to do more, just like a lot of time on your feet. And probably the things I would say that really helped most for that last training run were the back-to-back longer runs. I did a run when I knew I was going to be ready for the 6 hour run, when I did 4 hours in one day. So we got about 28 miles one day. And then the next day, Sunday, so Saturday, 28 miles. And the next day I had to come back and do 2 hours up tempo. So we wanted to do 2 hours around 7:15 minute pace. And I was sore, you know, usually don't go run a marathon and like, man, next day I want to run 2 hours up tempo. Yeah. And I was just like, this is going to be hard. But I knew, like, when I finished that run, I was going to be okay. It's like getting your body used to that type of, you got to keep going and pushing when you're tired. So, but yeah, to answer your question, like daily, it's anywhere between 8 and, I would probably say 8 and 14 miles on the weekdays. The weekends, you know, usually one or 2 days. Like this coming weekends, I've got a 4 hour, 1 hour. Next weekend is 3 hour, 3 hours. It'll get up to like 5 hours, 2 hours. So It's a lot. It's a lot of volume. But I usually have a buddy that'll come jump in for a couple hours, and sometimes I can get someone to meet me like initially, and another buddy to meet me in the middle, you know. So, but I love it. I feel very just, I don't know, I feel like it's my gift of gratitude too. Like I'm a healthy person, and just being able to do something I love and being able to use that to kind of advocate, just to reach people, just to kind of share this message is something I'm grateful for and proud of.
Yeah. And what kind of advice would you give like a endurance athlete who wants to kind of change to like a low carb or even a carnivore type diet? Like, what would the first steps be, I guess?
First steps is you need to make sure you do this in a time where you can really go easy. Like, this is not, I have a major competition in a month, or I want to be ready in 3 months for a race. Like, I mean, when I first started working with Zach, like he told me like, hey, this is a long process. Like being fully fat adapted can actually take years. Like this isn't next week, next month. We're such like a quick, this is fix society, right? I want it now.
Yeah.
And I have people reach out to me now, like, oh, I just started keto and I can't run. Like, yeah, no kidding. Like it's a major stress on your body to shift from, burning glucose and glycogen to burning, ketones and free fatty acids. Mm-hmm. So being able to really take it slow. I would say you need to have a month where you literally take your ego and you put it on the shelf. Because if you're running 9 or 10 minute pace now, you need to be okay with like running 12-minute pace and walking. Like you are not going to be able to do this if you don't give your body that time to adapt. So, because I think sometimes people freak out like, oh no, this isn't working. I feel terrible. Yeah, it's supposed to, it's going to feel terrible initially. So just kind of being ready for that. So being patient with that first, 30 days. And, continuing to stay hydrated is really important. I did not take electrolytes like the first couple of weeks, and I had one of the worst headaches of my life. So making sure you're taking electrolytes, making sure you're drinking plenty of fluid. And then, after that initial kind of 30-day adaptation period, I think most people will benefit, kind of finding what is a good carbohydrate kind of set point for them, whether that's 25, 50 grams. I think some people can get really zealous, like, I'm never going to eat a carb again. It's like, you really want to be, an endurance athlete, you're probably going to be better off figuring out which carbohydrates work for you. Mm-hmm. And that way you can leverage them. And that's what Zach and I do. We have kind of this set we follow for a day, but certainly during our race, we're eating a lot more carbs. We're using them kind of as rocket fuel. It'd be like if you never drank caffeine and all of a sudden you drink a bunch of coffee, it's like, whoa, let's go, So, and then like working with somebody I think can be helpful. If you, I'm always, people are always welcome to reach out to me with questions. I don't do one-on-one coaching right now, but just kind of bouncing off certain ideas I think can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's great advice. I agree. I know I had a really hard time. And this is before I had ever heard of keto or anything. I just did a diet that was just vegetables and meat. And I didn't know anything.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a hard time for like 2 weeks. I felt like I was dying. It sucked.
And you got to make sure you get enough calories and enough fat. Like, we're just taught, especially as women, like, oh, you need this 3-ounce chicken breast. Like, no, it's going to be big. It needs to be like, because most of your calories, because, if you're used to eating like cereal or oatmeal and a bagel, like, you had 400, 500, 600 calories of carbs. So you got to be thinking like, I'm going to be having a lot of that is, fat and protein. So just getting used to like, this is different. When I'd come in, when I first started, I still work in the hospital. I'd come into the office and everyone's eating oatmeal and bagels and donuts. And I'm here with my pound of ground beef, it's going to be a little weird, but kind of getting used to like, okay, I'm going to be eating much larger portions of that protein and fat.
Yeah. I think that's what really helps me. Just like within the last couple of years is just upping my fat and my protein.
Yeah.
That helped me so much.
Good.
Let's see here. Well, let's go back to the dietary guidelines for a minute. Can you tell us like where those came from?
It's a whole chapter. It's a long crazy story. Yeah. So kind of it's interesting because I think probably on the most basic level, most people probably are like, there's probably some corporate influence in here, right? But it's amazingly convoluted, like how it came to be. It really started. It started with Ellen White, who ended up starting the Seventh-day Adventist Church. This woman believed that she was having visions from God that told her that meat was bad and meat was sinful and meat gave you lustful thoughts. And she ended up, starting one of the first institutions. They called it medical evangelism that taught dentists and doctors and dietitians. The first dietitians went through her her school. And and she actually had an intern, a young intern, and he was the Kellogg's, John Harvey Kellogg. So, thinking that meat was bad and caused all these like lustful thoughts, he and her created products that were supposed to be anti-aphrodisiacs. They took a lot of meat products and made them like, use wheat gluten to recreate these like quote unquote fake meats and nut-based meats. And she wrote an entire book about how dangerous meat was and how it's bad for your stomach. It's bad for, all kinds of things, and how like good parents and good mothers will train their kids how to just, bake bread. And it's really crazy how it's just like this woman's vision started teaching this. So, you get this whole institution of people believing that like, okay, meat is bad, meat products aren't good, you don't need them. Mm-hmm. And then, then you kind of fast forward to, World War II, as soon as the U.S. Joined the war, even before the U.S. joined the war, we were growing a lot more crops for our allies. So farmers started to get subsidies, but certainly as the U.S. joined the war, they were like, wow, now we even need more stuff. So we were just incentivizing farmers to grow more corn and more wheat and more soy. And, but at this time though, things like full fat milk and, meat were still considered valuable, but now we had like all these excess crops, all this. And then after the war, the government came in and was like, whoa, we need to try to rescind some of these subsidies. And the farmers were like, And it's interesting. Some of those subsidies that were created during the 1940s are still there today.
Wow. And
so now you have, a society that has a lot more wheat and a lot more corn. And then we had Ansel Keys. We started to see some incidences in the 50s and, 60s of more heart disease. Mm-hmm. And he was the first person, a nutritional scientist that said like, hey, I believe it's diet. I believe that it has to do with animal fats. And if you look, actually, if you ever had an opportunity to look at like a occluded artery, it actually looks like saturated fat. It looks like that clog kind of actually looks like animal fat. Mm-hmm. So he said, I'm going to prove it. So he looked at 22 countries. It's called the 22 country study. And his goal was to say like, hey, you know what? I've studied all these countries, and the countries that have the highest animal fat consumption have the greatest risk of heart disease. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. Actually, the countries that he looked at that ate the most meat had the lowest incidence of heart disease. So, the right and ethical thing to do would have been to say, oh, here's my hypothesis is wrong. But what he did was he was like, well, I'm only going to use 7 out of these 22 that fit my hypothesis. And he wrote that. Like he basically had a huge influence. He used those 7 countries and said, animal fat it's fat and meat. That's what's bad. That's what's killing everybody. Mm-hmm. And around the same time, there started to come some evidence. There started evidence coming out that like, you know what, we think it could be like sugar and flour. Like they were starting to see some studies of people eating a lot of sugar, and the sugar industry came forward and offered to a scientist at Harvard the equivalent today of $48,000 to say like, hey, look, we need you to we don't want to say it's unethical, but really it is unethical. We need you to publish these studies saying it's not sugar, it's fat. And this actually, there was a huge article that came out about this in 2014, had all this information and all this data, like showing how corrupt and terrible this was. So, and back in the 60s, you didn't have to say who's funding your study. So no one knew until, 10 years ago or less than 10 years ago that the sugar industry had funded this.
Wow.
But they kind of ran with it. Like this was published in a major journal. So you had Ansel Keys saying it's animal fat is bad. You had these, this Harvard scientist saying, oh my God, it's not sugar, it's fat. And then, now we're almost in the 70s. And then we had, pretty tumultuous time in the US with Vietnam. And we have President Nixon trying to get votes. And it was like, what can I do? How do I get the American people to vote for me? This is nuts. And he thought driving food costs down would really help. I'm like, all right, how do we do that? So we hired this guy named Earl Butz. I can't make that up. And Butz said, well, let's once again, let's give subsidies. Let's drive the cost of food down. And so they had farmers grow corn. They just subsidized the crap out of corn. And so around that time, everything started to be fried in vegetable oil, corn oil. Mm-hmm. Like even McDonald's used to fry their French fries in tallow, animal fat. Now it's corn oil. And then corn showed up everywhere. It was corn and cereal, corn and bread, corn. Animals are fed corn because you just had so much corn. Mm-hmm. And it did drive food costs down. Food costs started to go down, which people loved. But most people didn't know, like, oh my God, corn isn't everything. Mm-hmm. But then you had a major problem. It was like, Butts, we got like way too much corn. What do we do? So Butts flies over to Japan to check out this new technology. Like, oh my gosh, check out what the Japanese are doing with corn. And they were turning it into high fructose corn syrup.
Oh God.
And manufacturers loved that. All of a sudden, it was a 1/3 the cost of sugar. So we can you're telling me we can take corn and it can be cheaper than sugar and it actually extends shelf life. Holy crap. So it was like a food manufacturer's dream. Like, this is great. This is amazing. And so most people didn't know that their meats, their dressings, everything started to be injecting with high fructose corn syrup. So once again, drove the price down, extended shelf life. And and then we have the Mcgovern Committee. This is the same committee that was during the 60s was their goal was to try to help alleviate poverty and start the food stamp program. Now it was like, we got a problem. People aren't actually thin anymore. We need you to help deal with obese people. So I use an example in the book, of poor Shaquille O'Neal, kind of the movie Shazam, where he was just terrible in that movie. He's such a phenomenal basketball player, but he was a terrible actor. So you have this committee that really actually helped reduce, severe malnutrition. But now we're asking them to help with the obesity crisis. And they don't know what the heck they're doing. So that's when, food manufacturers stepped in and said, oh, hey, we'll help. Let us help write these guidelines, And so it was a mess. Then you had major conflict of interest with a lot of the food manufacturers. How can we make our processed foods kind of fit into this low fat paradigm? And it was kind of a mess. From there, it became that everybody needs, quote unquote, healthy whole grains, high carbohydrates. We need to keep meat and fat limited. Mm-hmm. And we have had so many studies since the 2010, even to where the American Association of Cardiology came forward and said, look, there is no evidence that saturated fat causes the disease. Yet our guidelines remain unchanged because of corporate policy and influence. So that's that's a huge number. It's quite the convoluted story. It almost sounds like you didn't know better, like somebody's making this up, but
it sounds like a movie.
It could be. It truly could be. And it's just like, I think we have to really embrace the fact that these guidelines can never be for our health,
Yeah. It's really hard though, because a lot of these dietary guidelines kind of govern this, what schools get and daycares and all kinds of programs, because that's
they don't kind of govern it. They do govern it. Schools, hospitals where I work where I worked, hospitals, schools, prisons. I've asked the question, like, how different would our society be as opposed to these nonsense guidelines if we actually did a species specific food pyramid, meaning, we have different animals in my house. We have a tortoise, we have a dog. We feed the tortoise very differently than how we feed the dog because they are different species. Mm-hmm. Nobody would argue with that. So the further humans have moved away from a species specific diet, which is meat, fat, and a small amount of plants you can tolerate, the sicker we become. So if our guidelines reflected what our human physiology was designed to eat and process and utilize, if we started feeding kids in school this, if we started feeding, I would hypothesize we would have a much healthier, less anxious, depressed society.
Yeah, I agree. I know I had to take my son's health into my own hands too, because he had anxiety, he had depression, and this is all like by the age of like 8. Wow. So I started just packing his lunch, and we switched him over to like a gluten-free diet. He had a lot of ADD, symptoms, and everybody was amazed about how he improved, his behaviors, his focus. He loves meat, he loves it. And he knows how much better he feels. And it's just hard because I go to his school, and then they have, for some functions, for, food, they had, just all this processed, like cereal, jellos, like just crap, I guess.
Yeah. And I think you made a really good point there. And the first point is it's really interesting. And I saw this in the hospital, how much younger we're seeing people come in with ailments. Like I worked in 2 psychiatric facilities, and we had people, one had adolescents, we had kids in there, 8, 9, 10 with had attempted suicide, seeing people with early dementia, Alzheimer's, strokes, younger than me, 30s,
Yeah.
And also I think the greatest way to convince somebody that change is good is having them experience it. Because for me, that's the reason why I will always eat this way. Like I'm very grateful for my performance as an athlete, but just how I feel, like how I function in the world. And I think most people get that, like kids get that. Certainly adults get that. Like, yeah, I feel so much better. And I think we have to be careful. Like, I don't want food to ever have like a moral value. It's not like you're good or bad, whatever, if you eat something, but I want it to be like, yeah, I know when I eat this way, I don't feel very good,
Yeah.
And so it kind of puts like the onus back on me. Like, oh, I get to choose that this is what I want to eat because I feel great,
Yeah, and it was interesting with like my son, it was really hard at first, but he would like have something that wasn't the best. And it wasn't just me saying, don't eat that, but he would experience it and he would be really sick. And he's like, oh, Mom, I don't feel that great. I'm like, well, what did we learn from this? And
truly, like kind of letting him own his own experience. Like, okay, and like, what should we do about it?
Yeah, because it is hard. It's like you say, like, we're not pushing our way of eating or this is a good food, this is a bad food, but we're kind of reflecting, like, how does it make me feel?
100%.
And I guess like I've kind of gone up and down in my health journey, and it was hard. It was hard in the beginning because, it's hard at first to give up all of those things that are so addictive. Is kind of what I struggled with, is the addiction to the sugar and the carbs.
Absolutely.
But then once you take it away and then you realize how it makes you feel, and then, to eat just a better, cleaner, just better fuel for your body,
Yeah. And I sometimes think I appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes we don't talk about that enough. I think we don't talk about like, this is really hard and this sucks. And sometimes like, I've been in this journey for a while and I know how profoundly terrible things make me feel. And there are times that I'm like, oh, I just want to, freaking whatever. Cause it just, it soothes you. It's immediate soothing, whatever. So being able to, kind of own that and be like, yeah, this is hard, but also being able to step back and say like, yeah, but I've been there. Like, I know how that feels. It doesn't feel good. Yeah. And just kind of being able to kind of own your own journey.
Yeah. I kind of noticed a difference because I quit alcohol too. It's been 2 years for me now, but I struggled with that. And then I struggled in the same exact kind of way with like sweets, like chocolate or, sugar, I guess. And it would always kind of sneak back in. And then I felt the same. It was really strange to me when I first realized this, but how I felt the same way as I would feel. And I was doing the same kind of habits, I guess, as alcohol, like where I hid it at first. I would eat it in my closet. I would hide it. I would escape, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I mean, if any of your listeners haven't read the book, The Power of Habit or Atomic Habits, those are both fantastic books. The Power of Habit is the first one I read. And they talk about how, behaviors never really go away. So it's unfortunately, and I know this for me, like if I used to finish most of my days with a big thing of ice cream or cookies or whatever. So like that actual really that wiring in my brain may never go away. So I have to learn how to replace that. Right. And unfortunately, very early on in my life, I continue to replace, habits. I no longer restricted. I wasn't suffering with that part of my life, but I started to drink heavily, or I started to engage in self-injury. So it is a really good point that you make, that a lot of behaviors can sometimes shift into other behaviors that may not be so ideal. So, but it's just, I always tell people like everything we do, like, we're so hard on ourselves. Like, it's just information. It's feedback. Okay, well, this is what happened. Let's try something else, if that doesn't work. So I'm always, willing to grow, learn, change. But yeah, I've talked to other people, I was talking with Sarah, carnivore yogi, the other day about how, like, for her, that had a similar experience. She's very open about dealing with alcohol. Yeah. So yeah, I think being able to kind of see, like, can I do this? Is this going to be something positive for me, or is this kind of just setting me up to do similar behaviors that I did with food is a really good thing to think about.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, for me, it would lead, like, I would start eating a little sugar, and then that would lead back to drinking. You know, so I had to replace it. I started just replacing, like every time I was craving sugar, I'd just eat a little bit of butter.
Oh, cool.
With salt.
Yeah.
That actually helped. It was really weird. I thought it was weird at first. But I just started doing that, and then I didn't crave it. It was really weird. I just didn't crave it anymore.
Nice. Very good.
Well, I'm not going to keep you much longer. But let's talk a little bit about your book here and where people can find this book.
Yeah, the Dieticians Dilemma. So I am very excited that not this coming weekend, but the next weekend, we will be starting to record the audiobook. So it will be out on Audible or Amazon Audio. I learned that no longer to promise dates. I did this for the book and we kept having to push it back. But the goal would be sometime this summer. Like just, you know, we'll be reading it. It's got to be edited. But right now, if you want to get on Amazon, you can get the paperback book. You can get the Kindle. It's just $5.99. I mean, I really appreciate, you know, all the support. We're donating a portion of all the sales to Chris Palmer's clinical trial for the ketogenic diet, mental health. And it's my journey. Hopefully it's interesting. And it also has, like you said, I wanted to break down topics I thought I could speak really well to, including, you know, diabetes, mental disorders, eating disorders, sarcopenia, and heart disease. So I talk about like what I saw in the hospital, and for people who are really science minded or want more data, there's 180 clinical trials. There's 25 testimonies. People were very surprised, wanted to know more about my running. So there's a chapter about my running and my first ultra race. But yeah, I just hope people who read it find it inspirational. And just, it was my goal just to give people hope too, because I've been there, you know, I've been in the depths of an eating disorder, the depths of mental, you know, illness, struggling with food addictions myself. So there's a really beautiful life, you know, beyond the brokenness. So I'm thrilled that so far most of the reviews have been good. I've had a couple of vegans give me some negative reviews, but we can kind of expect that. So that's all right. Yeah,
that comes with the territory sometimes. I know. I read your book in the middle of my COVID experience. And it was such a, like, I loved it. It was such a, like, an easy read, because I have read some, like, keto, you know, carnivore books, and some of them I actually couldn't, you know, get through the whole thing because, you know, I love all the science stuff, but sometimes you just want to read, like, practical kind of advice.
Yeah, I wanted it to be like anybody can read it. Like my mom can pick it up and, you know, read it. And also just sharing more through stories and experience versus like, and I mean, I love science. I'm a science nerd, but I've also read a couple of books where I'm like, my God, this is over my head. You know, like I want it to be flowing and easy to read. So.
Yeah. And then it was so inspirational, like all the stories. And then, you know, I even found myself getting really emotional in some parts of it, you know, and I don't know, it just kind of hit all the points.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I've been really humbled that people have said like, wow, your story made me cry or made me sad. My wife would not help me edit the first chapter. She said it made her so sad to read. And I was like, it has a happy ending. Like,
yeah, it does.
But, you know, it is. I'd read so many books about eating disorder and eating disorder recovery. And I often, sometimes I just thought, man, we just don't quite get the depth of it. Like it's so hopeless. Like it just feels so broken. And so I was hoping to really hammer that home. Like I just wanted anybody who was reading it that was struggling to be like, I hear you. Like I know it is this bad. It's not like, let's take the clinicalness out of it. Like let's get to like just pure human. Like it is awful. So hopefully I captured that. And like I said, I've just been humbled to have people reach out and say that they related and it was touching. So yeah, thank you very much for reading it.
Of course. Yeah. So where can people find you?
So I am on Instagram. That's where I'm most active. So you can find me at Run, Eat, Meet, Repeat. So if you message me, DM me, I'll get back to you. I am on Twitter, Michelle Hurn, RD. And I do have my website, thedietitiansdilemma.net. You can directly email me from there. And yeah, my goal is always to get back to people within about 48 hours. So that's the goal. Most of the time within 2 to 3 days, I can respond. But, you know, if you want to follow what I'm doing, my, you know, advocacy stories, things like that, Instagram is definitely the best place to find me.
Okay. Well, I will let you go, Michelle. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
Bye.